Hi, welcome back to Let's Get Lit. In today's video, we're going to go over Chapter 7 of The Great Gatsby by F. Scott Fitzgerald. So, I hope you're ready, because it's starting to ramp up. Alright, let's go ahead and time travel back. Alright, so let's begin with Chapter 7. This chapter starts off with Nick telling the reader that since his last encounter with Gatsby and Tom, Gatsby has ceased having parties at his house. So, he decides to go over to Gatsby's house and see for himself what's going on. When he arrives at the door and knocks on it, a new butler opens it whom he's never seen before. Nick asks if Mr. Gatsby is sick, to which the new butler very frankly and rudely says no. Nick asks the butler if he will let Mr. Gatsby know that Mr. Carraway is seeking after him. The new butler says yes, and then promptly slams the door in Nick's face. The next day, Gatsby calls Nick on the telephone, where Nick asks if Mr. Gatsby is going away. Gatsby responds that no, he's not going away, to which Nick says he has heard rumors that Gatsby has fired all of his servants. Gatsby says that he has, and that he has hired new staff who don't gossip. He also says that Daisy has been coming over quite often in the afternoons. Gatsby also asks if Nick would accompany Gatsby for lunch tomorrow at Daisy's house. Gatsby also mentioned that Mrs. Baker will be there. About 30 minutes later, Daisy calls Nick on the telephone and seems relieved to find out that he'll be coming for lunch tomorrow. The next day comes, and it is one of the hottest days of the year. Nick remarks that on the way to Daisy and Tom's house, he sees all of the little indicators of just how hot of a day it is. To people sweating, to conversations being made about the weather, it's just the general atmosphere in and of itself. Once Nick and Gatsby get to Tom and Daisy's house, they're brought inside. Nick notes that even the smallest amount of niceties and gesture takes a great effort to do because of the heat. Once Gatsby and Nick are inside the house, they are ushered into the room where Daisy and Miss Baker are. Nick notices that Jordan and Daisy are laying on the couches, and they're unable to move due to the heat. Nick asks where Tom is at, but before they can get an answer, they can hear Tom's voice in the hallway on the telephone. Jordan says that the rumor is that Tom's girl is on the phone. They can hear a snippet of Tom's conversation where he says that he won't be selling that person a car, and that they shouldn't be bothering him during lunchtime. Tom then opens the door from the hall and addresses to everyone in the room. Daisy asks for him to make everyone a cold drink. Tom leaves the room, and when he does, Daisy gets up and goes over to Gatsby and kisses him on the mouth. She tells him, "You know I love you." After Jordan makes a remark, Daisy goes and sits back on the couch. Once she is seated, a nurse comes in, leading a little girl into the room. We learned that this is Daisy's child, and that the child rushes over to her mother. Daisy tells her daughter to go over and say hi to Mr. Gatsby and Nick. After this point, Nick mentions that Gatsby didn't believe she had a child until this very moment. The child says that she got dressed before lunch, and Daisy says that's because your mother wants to show you off. The child then claims that Auntie Jordan has a white dress on too. Daisy asks her daughter how she likes her mother's friends, and if she thinks they're pretty. The daughter asks where's Daddy. Daisy makes a comment about how her daughter looks just like her and not her dad. We then learn the child's name is Pammy. The nurse takes a step forward, holds out her hand to the child, and quickly the child is ushered away. Once the child has gone away, Tom comes back with 4 Jen Rickeys, full of ice. Tom begins to make small talk about the sun and then asks Gatsby to come outside with him and look around. After being out on the veranda for a short time, they all go back inside to the dining room and have lunch. They have a small conversation about what they should do that afternoon and in the next 30 years. Jordan mentions that once fall comes around, life begins anew. Daisy again asks who wants to go to town. When she says this, Gatsby and her meet eyes for a second. During this interaction, Nick mentions that you could feel the love between Daisy and Gatsby, and that Tom saw this. As Daisy tries to make small talk, Tom quickly breaks in and says, "Yes, let's go to town. We're all going to town." As he got up, his eyes were moving between Gatsby and his wife, and he realized what was going on. Their true relationship. Nick mentioned that you could see Tom starting to tremble, losing his self-control. Jordan and Daisy make their way upstairs to get ready while the 3 men stood downstairs. As the 3 men were waiting downstairs, Tom tries to start a conversation with Gatsby, but Nick notices just how tense everyone is. From upstairs, Daisy asks if they're going to bring anything to drink with them. Tom says that he'll grab some whiskey. Tom and Gatsby make their way outside and stand in front of the house. Gatsby remarks how wonderful Daisy's voice is, and wonders why he doesn't hear this tone with other women. Nick says he's figured it out, and that it's because her voice is full of money, to which they both muse over. Not long after this, Tom comes out with a quart bottle and a towel, and following behind him are Daisy and Jordan, wearing small hats and carrying light capes in their arms. Gatsby offers to drive everyone in his car. He then feels the hot green leather of the seats and makes a comment about how he should have left it in the shade. Tom asks if his car is a standard shift, to which Gatsby says yes. Then Tom comes up with the idea that he should take Gatsby's car, and Gatsby should be driving the coupe into town. Gatsby did not like this idea at all. He tries to make the comment that he doesn't think that there's much gas in it, which Tom says nonsense, there's plenty of gas, and if he does run out, he can stop at a drugstore, and you can purchase anything at a drugstore nowadays. As Tom moves closer to Gatsby's car, Tom motions for Daisy to ride with him, to which Daisy says no. Nick and Jordan should ride with Tom, and she should ride with Gatsby, as she's moving closer to him. Nick then says that Jordan himself and Tom get into the front seat of Gatsby's car. Tom pushes some unfamiliar gears and they set off toward town. As the three of them are driving into the city, Tom begins to start a conversation about Gatsby. He lets the others know that he's been doing some small investigations into Mr. Gatsby's past. Jordan is trying to see if the facts that Gatsby told her has lined up with what Tom has found out, and Tom says no. As Tom goes on about Gatsby, Jordan asks why did he even bother to invite Gatsby to dinner in the first place, to which Tom says that it was Daisy's idea, not his. Nick mentioned that they were a little bit irritable now with the hot sun and the fading alcohol from their system, so they drove in silence for a while. As they made their way into the Valley of Ash, the view of T.J. Eckelberg's eyes came into sight. Tom mentioned that they have enough gas to get them to town, but Jordan objects, saying she doesn't want to get stranded out in the heat. Tom then throws on both of the brakes and patiently stops under the sign, waiting for the person at the gas station to come and fill up their car. Mr. Wilson comes out and lets Tom know that he's not feeling well. He's sick. Tom asks what's the matter, to which Mr. Wilson responds that he just feels run down. Tom asks if he should fill up the car himself, to which Mr. Wilson comes out of the doorway and starts for the car. Tom can see just how sickly Mr. Wilson looks. Mr. Wilson says that he doesn't intend to interrupt Tom's lunch, but said that he needed money pretty bad and was wondering when he was going to sell him his car. Tom asked if he liked the yellow car that he was currently driving. Mr. Wilson says yes, but he would prefer to buy Tom's other car because he'd be able to make money on it. Tom asks why Mr. Wilson needs money so badly, to which he responds that him and his wife are going out west. Tom is very surprised by this and asks if his wife truly wants to go west. Mr. Wilson responds that she's been talking about it for years, and he says that she's going to be going whether she truly wants to or not, that Mr. Wilson is going to get her away. At that moment, the coupe flashed by them in a hurry with dust and a flash of a waving hand. Tom asks how much money he owes Mr. Wilson, to which Mr. Wilson says that he just got wise to some information in the last 2 days. That's why he wants to go away, and that's why he's been bothering Tom about the car. To which Tom asks again how much money does he owe him for the gas. Mr. Wilson says $1.20. During this exchange, it clicks in Nick's head as to what Mr. Wilson is saying. Nick realizes that Mr. Wilson knows about the affair and the extra life his wife has been having behind his back. Nick mentions that he's not quite sure if Tom has caught on to this, but then Tom says that he'll let him have the car and he'll send it over tomorrow. Nick mentions that he could feel the eyes of the optometrist behind them, watching the scene. But he also states that he felt another pair of eyes no less than 20 feet away staring at them as well. Nick then notes that in one of the windows over the garage, the curtains had been moved aside and Myrtle Wilson was peering down at the car. She was so engrossed in what was happening that she wasn't even trying to be conspicuous. Nick then notices that Myrtle is not looking at Tom or Mr. Wilson, but is looking directly at Jordan with a jealous manner. Nick believes that Myrtle thinks Jordan is Tom's wife. As Tom, Jordan, and Nick begin to drive away towards town, Nick could sense that Tom was losing all of his surroundings. That up until an hour ago, he thought that his life was in control with his wife and mistress, but now realizing that everything was in jeopardy. As Tom was going about 50 miles an hour to catch up, they came into contact with a blue coupe that held Gatsby and Daisy. As they were stopped, they tried to shout to each other where to meet up. They finally decide at the Plaza Hotel. As Gatsby and Daisy drove away, Tom's eyes were constantly glued to the car, worried that they would drive out of sight. Once they reached the Plaza Hotel, they all decided to meet inside of a suite. Once everyone is inside the suite, Nick mentions just how truly hot it is inside that room with everyone there. Daisy asks for them to open all the windows, to which they do, but only letting in warm air. With the hot weather and the heat of the room, everyone seems to be getting heated. Tensions are high as people begin to talk. From below, they can hear a wedding that's taking place, and Daisy notes the music and that she was married in June. Tom begins to question Gatsby, and with every question, his anger gets more and more elevated, questioning Gatsby about his schooling, about his life, about everything that's going on, until Tom finally has it out with Gatsby and asks Gatsby if he believes in the sanctity of marriage and of family and family institutions. Daisy tries to warn Tom about self-control, but that's when Tom snaps. As he snaps, Nick notates that he looks like a man on the verge of civilization. Gatsby begins to get into an argument with Tom, stating that Daisy never loved Tom and the only reason she married Tom was for the money, and she was tired of waiting for Gatsby to become rich. At this argument, Nick and Jordan tried to excuse themselves, but both Tom and Gatsby insisted that they stay. Daisy tries mentioning going home, but no one listens to her. Gatsby then says that Daisy never loved Tom and that it was a mistake, and that she never loved anyone except for him. Tom chimes back against this and says that it's all a lie. Gatsby says that Tom truly never loved Daisy, to which Tom yells at Gatsby and says that he does love Daisy and that he's always loved her. Though he may have made mistakes and goes off to fool around, he always comes back because he knows truly in his heart that he loves her and she loves him. Daisy tells Tom that he is revolting and says she should tell everyone the real reason why they had to leave Chicago. Gatsby walks over to Daisy and says it's all fine now. All she must do is tell Tom that she never truly loved him. At the mention of this, Tom becomes very tender and mentions different times of the love he has had for her. He asks her if all of it was a lie, to which Daisy says that she never really loved Tom. After she says this, she tries to light a cigarette, but she's trembling way too hard. Then she tells Gatsby that he wants too much and that she loves him now, and isn't that enough? She then says that she did love Tom, once, but she also loved Gatsby. Gatsby then questions that she loves him too. Tom chimes in and says it's all a lie. She didn't even know he was alive, and says these things are between Daisy and him that neither of them can ever forget. Then, Gatsby says that he wants to speak to Daisy alone, and that she's all excited. Tom tries to reassure his love for Daisy, but Gatsby tries to show Daisy that that is a lie. Gatsby then tells Tom that Daisy will be leaving him, to which Tom replies that it's nonsense. Tom then says that she certainly would not leave him for some commoner, especially when they would have to steal a ring just to put it on her finger. This argument brings up what Gatsby does for a living. Tom tells Gatsby that he's pegged him for a bootlegger and was not far off. Tom tells everyone about him and Wolfsheim buying up drugstores in New York and Chicago to sell grain alcohol over the counter, to which Gatsby says that Walter Chase wasn't too fond of Tom at all. Gatsby then criticizes Tom about the fact that Tom let Chase go to jail for a month in New Jersey, and that Chase came to them dead broke, happy to find money somewhere. Tom says that Walter could have Gatsby up on betting laws, but Wolfsheim has scared him into shutting his mouth. As Tom and Gatsby are going at it with each other's personal secrets, Nick looks towards Daisy, sitting in fear. As the argument passes, Gatsby tries to reassure Daisy, but with every word he says to her, she draws further and further away from him into herself. Gatsby knew that he was losing her. Daisy then asks again if they can go home, and that she doesn't like it here anymore. Tom then insists that Gatsby and Daisy head out in his car back home. Daisy could not believe what Tom was saying, but Tom said that he wasn't worried now. And just like that, they were gone without a word. At 7 o'clock that evening, Nick, Jordan, and Tom head for the coupe back to Long Island. Nick recalled that Tom was talking, but not really towards anyone, more towards himself, and he noticed that Jordan and him were trying to put everything behind them. Nick then gives the reader a brief story about the death that has happened in front of Mr. Wilson's garage. He notes of a young Greek man, Nicholas, who ran a coffee joint beside the ash heap, and now he went to talk to Mr. Wilson because he just saw how sick he looked. Mr. Wilson said that he could not close shop because he needed the money very badly. He explained that he had his wife locked up and that they were going to move away the day after tomorrow. Nicholas was astonished because he had known his neighbor for years but never thought he was capable of something like this. As they were talking, Nicholas saw people going towards his cafe, so he went to go help them. He said he could overhear yelling from the garage, and that Miss Wilson was yelling at Mr. Wilson, that if he wanted to beat her, he should have and shouldn't be such a coward. A moment later, Myrtle was running out of the garage and into the streets with her hands up as she was hit by a car. At that moment, traffic stopped, and there was a huge crowd gathered around outside of the garage. When Nicholas went to look at the body, he saw that in an instant she was dead. As Tom, Jordan, and Nick were driving home, they noticed that there was a wreck and that it was good because Mr. Wilson would finally have a little extra business. Nick also mentions that Tom had no intention of stopping until they came nearer to the wreck. Once they were stopped, Nick notes that he can hear hollow wailing sounds which came from inside of the garage. As they all walked closer to the garage, they could hear someone crying. As they were trying to get inside, people were pushing all around and they kept moving in and out, and people pushed them towards the center, which Nick says that's when he saw Myrtle's body wrapped in a blanket on the table. When Nick looked up, he could see Tom looking at Myrtle's body. Nick then looked around the room and saw Mr. Wilson talking to a police officer in the corner. He then saw Tom move towards Mr. Wilson asking what happened and that he wanted to know. Mr. Wilson says automobile hit her and instantly killed her. Mr. Wilson said she ran out into the road and the son of a bitch didn't even stop the car. To which Nicholas said there were two cars, one coming and one going. The policeman asked where, to which all he said was, in either direction. From the crowd, a well-dressed black man stepped out and said that it was a yellow car that in fact hit her. A big new yellow car. The policeman asked if he saw the accident, to which the black man said no, but the car passed him down the road going faster than 40 or 50 miles an hour, possibly even 60. As Nick is hearing this, he looks at Tom and he can see all of Tom's muscles tensing and tightening under his coat. Tom goes to Wilson and says that the yellow car he was driving this afternoon was not his, that he only arrived to the garage a minute ago in his coupe, and that he hasn't seen the yellow car all afternoon. Tom informs the police officer that he is a friend of Mr. Wilson's. Mr. Wilson tells the police officer that Tom thinks he knows exactly whose car it is. The policeman asks what color Tom's car is, and he responds with a blue coupe. They then make their way from the garage back outside. As they were leaving, drives slowly until everything was behind them. Then his foot went hard and the coupe raced along through the night. Nick mentioned that he could hear the low husky sobs that Tom was making behind his steering wheel. Tom then whimpered that the goddamn coward didn't even stop his car. They made it back to the Buchanan's house and they saw that several lights were on. Nick mentioned that this is how he knew Daisy was home. He mentions that he should have dropped Nick off in West Egg, but there was nothing they could do tonight. Tom says he'll telephone for a taxi to take him home, and while they're waiting, him and Jordan should go into the kitchen and get some supper. Nick says no, but thank you. The cab would be very nice. Jordan tries to convince him to stay a little longer and have some dinner, but Nick is already tired of everyone and everything that's going on. Jordan then sees that Nick is not having any of it and turns away into the house. Nick mentions that he can hear the butler on the phone calling a cab. Nick goes down to the driveway to wait for the cab when he sees Gatsby between two bushes. Gatsby asks if Nick saw any trouble on the road, to which Nick says yes. Gatsby asks if the woman had died, to which Nick says yes. Gatsby mentions that he thought so when he told Daisy, and that it's better the shock should come all at once. Nick mentions that Gatsby spoke as if Daisy's reaction was the only thing that mattered. Gatsby then tells Nick that he got home by a side road and left the car in his garage and that he doesn't think anybody saw him, but of course he can't be sure. Gatsby asks who the woman was, to which Nick says her name was Myrtle. Her husband owned the garage. Nick asked how everything happened. Gatsby said he tried to swing the wheel before he could finish. Nick asks was Daisy driving, and Gatsby says yes, but that he will always say that he drove instead. Gatsby explained that once she left New York, she was very nervous and she thought driving would steady her nerves. He then says that the woman rushed out just as they were passing a car coming the other way. It all happened so fast. He said that Daisy at first swung towards the other car, but then at the last second swung back towards the woman. He said the second his hand reached for the wheel, he felt the shock and that it must have killed her instantly. Nick mentioned that it did open her up, but Gatsby stops Nick from finishing the sentence. Gatsby says that he'll be staying on the grounds of the Buchanans tonight and that Daisy has locked herself inside of her room. He also says that if Tom tries anything on Daisy, she will turn on and off the light, which will cue Gatsby. Nick says that Tom won't touch her and that he's not even thinking about her. Nick asks how long he will be staying, and Gatsby says until they go to bed. Nick mentions that Gatsby should sit and see if there's any sign of commotion. As Nick makes his way to the house, he can see there's a little light on in the kitchen, and he sneakily goes up and sees Daisy and Tom sitting across from each other at the dining table. He can't quite make out what they're saying, but he sees their body language and notes that there's no aggression. Around this time, Nick can hear the taxi coming down the driveway, so he makes his way back towards Gatsby. Gatsby asks if everything's okay, to which he responds yes, everything is fine. Nick mentions that Gatsby should come along with him to get some sleep, but Gatsby refuses. So, Nick gets into the cab, leaving Gatsby to watch over the house for the night. This concludes Chapter 7 of The Great Gatsby. Tune in next time as we go over Chapter 8. And as always, stay lit.